I'll sleep in my car tonight. Those 7 quiet words were never meant for anyone else to hear. But hidden beneath the glittering lights of the most exclusive charity gala in Manhattan, an immortal king with hearing far beyond human limits caught every syllable. Before the sun rose, he would make a decision that would shake both the human world and the vampire kingdom forever. At exactly 3:02 a.m., a black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided silently into the nearly empty parking lot behind the Grand Lexington Hotel. The city never truly slept, but this forgotten corner of Midtown felt untouched by the restless pulse of Manhattan. Frost shimmered across cracked asphalt. A bitter November wind swept discarded leaves against the concrete barriers, carrying the distant hum of traffic several blocks away. The luxury sedan came to a gentle stop beside an aging silver Honda Civic with faded paint and a dented passenger door. Its windows were fogged from the inside. The driver stepped out without a sound. Damien Ashcroft looked no older than 30, though centuries rested quietly behind his calm gray eyes. His tailored black overcoat moved gently in the wind as he studied the small car before him. Every security guard inside the hotel believed the billionaire CEO had left hours earlier. Every vampire elder assumed their king had returned directly to Ashcroft Manor after the gala. They were all wrong. Damien's gaze lingered on the little sedan. Through the thin layer of condensation covering the driver's side window, he could see her sleeping. Emily Carter had curled herself into the smallest shape possible across the front seat. Her waitress uniform was still neatly buttoned beneath an old wool sweater whose elbows had long ago begun to fray. One arm hugged a faded backpack like a pillow while the other rested near a paper cup that had gone cold hours earlier. She shivered, even in her sleep. The temperature had already dropped below 35 degrees. Her old car hadn't held proper heat in weeks. Damien remained perfectly still. His kind could hear heartbeats through brick walls, detect whispered conversations from hundreds of feet away, and sense fear long before it appeared on someone's face. Yet none of those gifts explained the strange weight pressing quietly against his chest tonight. 3 hours earlier, she had been nothing more than another waitress carrying silver trays through a ballroom filled with billionaires, celebrities, politicians, and creatures hidden behind expensive smiles. She had moved carefully through the crowd, apologizing whenever someone brushed past her, thanking guests who barely acknowledged she existed. She had never once complained. Not when another server blamed her for a broken champagne glass. Not when the event manager scolded her in front of everyone. Not even when she quietly counted the cash in her apron and realized it still wasn't enough. She had simply smiled, the kind of tired smile people wore when hope had become a daily decision instead of a feeling. Damien had noticed none of it. Kings rarely notice servers. Until one sentence changed everything. As the gala ended, Emily disappeared into a service hallway with another waitress. They believed they were alone. Damien had been walking past the marble corridor on his way toward a private elevator reserved for honored guests. The women spoke softly, unaware that immortal hearing ignored walls as easily as silence. "You can stay at my apartment," her friend whispered. Emily laughed gently, almost embarrassed. "No, it's okay," she said. "I'll sleep in my car tonight. I've done it before." There had been no self-pity, no anger, no expectation that anyone would rescue her. Just acceptance. And for reasons Damien himself still couldn't explain, those 7 words refused to leave his mind. Damien should have walked away. That was what every vampire king before him would have done. Humans struggled. Humans survived. Their short lives unfolded like brief sparks against the endless passage of immortal centuries. He had witnessed kingdoms rise and disappear beneath the weight of history. He had watched fortunes bloom overnight and vanish before the next generation. One waitress sleeping inside an old sedan should have meant absolutely nothing. Yet he remained standing beside her car while icy wind swept across the deserted parking lot. Emily stirred slightly beneath her sweater, pulling it closer around herself. Even asleep, she instinctively tucked her hands beneath her sleeves to keep them warm. Damien's eyes narrowed. There was a tiny notebook resting on the passenger seat beside a folded grocery receipt. Several pages had slipped loose, revealing neat handwriting illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby parking light. He did not need supernatural vision to recognize a carefully planned budget. Rent, gasoline, student loan payment, medication for mom. Every dollar had been accounted for. Every expense had been adjusted and crossed out, as though determination alone could create money that did not exist. The final line simply read, "Not enough." Damien slowly exhaled, though he no longer needed air to survive. Memories rarely visited him without invitation. Tonight they arrived anyway. Nearly 200 years earlier, another cold autumn night had found someone quietly placing a wool blanket across his shoulders while he worked through endless correspondence inside an ancient castle. She had smiled and whispered that no responsibility was worth forgetting simple kindness. Margaret's voice had disappeared from the world centuries ago, yet somehow the warmth behind Emily's quiet acceptance echoed that same impossible grace. He closed his eyes for only a heartbeat before opening them again. Coincidences did not move immortal hearts. Compassion did. Somewhere above, clouds drifted across the moon, covering the parking lot in deeper darkness. Damien reached into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce and removed a folded cashmere blanket reserved for long winter drives. It was charcoal gray, understated, and warmer than anything Emily likely owned. He approached the old Honda with deliberate care, opening the driver's side door just enough to avoid waking her. The hinges protested with the faintest squeak. Emily shifted slightly but remained asleep, exhausted beyond ordinary rest. Her breathing was slow and uneven. Damien gently unfolded the blanket and draped it over her shoulders, carefully tucking one corner beneath her backpack so it would not slide away during the night. She sighed softly, relaxing, almost immediately as warmth surrounded her. For the first time in hours, the tension faded from her face. Damien stepped back and quietly closed the door. He should leave now. Instead, he noticed the nearly empty fuel gauge. Less than 1/8 of a tank remained. Her registration sticker had expired. One rear tire looked dangerously worn. The windshield carried a hairline crack stretching almost halfway across the glass. None of these problems had appeared overnight. They were the quiet evidence of someone sacrificing every comfort simply to keep moving forward. A pair of headlights suddenly turned into the parking lot. Damien disappeared into the shadows before the vehicle completed its turn. A security patrol slowly circled the area, never once noticing the silent figure standing beyond the reach of the lights. When the patrol finally drove away, Damien removed a small silver card from his coat pocket. It carried no company logo, no name, only a discreet embossed crest known exclusively to the Ashcroft executive offices. Anyone presenting it would receive assistance without questions, without paperwork, and without publicity. He hesitated for the first time in decades. Anonymous generosity could easily become unwanted interference. But abandoning her here felt strangely impossible. He slipped the card beneath the windshield wiper where she would see it before driving away, then looked back one final time. Emily remained asleep beneath the blanket, unaware that the most powerful immortal in North America had quietly altered the course of his own carefully ordered existence. Even before realizing that this was only the first of many promises fate intended to place between them. The first rays of dawn slipped between the skyscrapers just as Emily opened her eyes. For a few seconds, she simply stared through the fogged windshield, confused by the unfamiliar warmth surrounding her shoulders. Then she looked down. The charcoal gray cashmere blanket certainly did not belong to her. She blinked twice, wondering if exhaustion had blurred the memory of the previous night. Slowly she sat up, rubbing the stiffness from her neck. The cold that usually greeted her every morning inside the car had somehow been replaced by lingering comfort. She reached out and touched the soft fabric, almost afraid it might disappear beneath her fingertips. It felt impossibly expensive. Carefully folding the blanket across her lap, she searched the empty parking lot. The hotel employees had already begun arriving for the breakfast shift. Delivery trucks backed toward loading docks. Security guards chatted near the entrance. Nobody seemed interested in the old Honda parked near the edge of the lot. Emily quietly opened the driver's door and stepped outside. Her shoes crunched against a thin layer of frost. As she stretched, something silver caught her attention beneath the windshield wiper. She frowned and carefully pulled out the elegant metal card. There was no company name, no phone number, only a beautifully engraved crest she did not recognize and a single sentence printed beneath it. If you ever need honest work or honest help, present this card at Ashcroft Holdings. She stared at the words for several seconds before laughing softly to herself. Somebody must have left it as part of a strange marketing campaign, she thought. Billionaires loved mysterious advertisements. She slipped the card into her backpack anyway. It felt wrong to throw away something that had clearly been crafted with such care. Before driving away, she noticed something else. Her gas gauge no longer hovered dangerously close to empty. It now pointed just above 3/4 of a tank. Emily froze. She had gone to sleep with barely enough fuel to reach work again. She climbed back into the driver's seat, checking every compartment. Nothing else had changed. Her wallet remained untouched. The small envelope containing rent money was still tucked beneath the passenger seat, exactly where she had hidden it. Whoever had filled her tank had taken absolutely nothing. She looked around again, hoping to spot someone watching from a distance, but the parking lot had become busy with ordinary morning routines. Confused yet grateful, Emily whispered a quiet thank you to no one in particular before starting the aging Honda. Several miles away, Damien stood inside the highest office of Ashcroft Holdings, overlooking Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling windows. Sunrise painted the city in shades of gold, though the light never reached his expression. His executive assistant, Nathan Reynolds, entered carrying a leather portfolio. Nathan had served the Ashcroft family for nearly 40 years and knew better than to interrupt unnecessary silence. Even so, he could not ignore the unusual report waiting inside the folder. "Sir, the overnight security logs show that your vehicle left the estate shortly after midnight and returned just before sunrise." Damien continued watching traffic below without turning around. "That is correct." Nathan hesitated. "There was another matter. The council has requested an emergency gathering this evening. They were informed that Your Majesty declined the customary escort assigned to all royal movements." Damien finally looked over his shoulder. His pale eyes remained calm, but Nathan immediately sensed the warning hidden beneath their stillness. "And who informed them?" Nathan lowered his gaze. "Someone has been watching more closely than we realized." Damien accepted the folder without another word. Inside waited financial reports worth billions of dollars, international merger proposals, and confidential agreements capable of influencing entire industries. Yet none of them held his attention for longer than a passing glance. Instead, his thoughts returned to a small silver Honda parked behind an aging hotel and a young waitress who believed quiet endurance was easier than asking the world for kindness. The emergency council chamber beneath Ashcroft Manor had stood unchanged for more than 400 years. Ancient stone columns stretched toward a vaulted ceiling where crystal chandeliers cast soft reflections across polished black marble. Every chair surrounding the circular table was already occupied when Damien entered without ceremony. Conversations ended instantly. 12 vampire elders watched him with unreadable expressions. Some had advised kings long before the United States existed. Others had once ruled their own territories before pledging loyalty to the Ashcroft bloodline. None of them expected their king to arrive carrying the silence he wore tonight. Elder Lucien folded his hands across the table. His silver hair framed a face untouched by time, but concern lingered behind his measured voice. "Your Majesty, we requested this gathering because unusual reports reached the council before sunrise." Damien remained standing. "Continue." Another elder slid a thin folder across the polished surface. "You dismissed your royal escort, traveled through Manhattan alone, and spent nearly an hour outside a public hotel." No accusation colored the statement, only careful observation. Damien glanced briefly at the unopened folder. Accurate. A quiet murmur moved around the chamber. Elder Helena leaned forward. Was the destination related to business? No. A diplomatic matter? No. A supernatural threat? Damien answered just as calmly. None. Silence settled once more. The answers created more questions than they resolved. Nathan stood several feet behind the king, expression carefully neutral. Even he had never witnessed Damien offering such brief replies during council proceedings. Finally, Elder Lucien spoke again. "Then perhaps your Majesty would explain why the most powerful immortal on this continent chose to leave the safety of the estate in the middle of the night without informing anyone." Damien looked toward the tall windows where late afternoon sunlight barely reached the ancient chamber. Because someone needed kindness more than ceremony. Several elders exchanged surprised glances. The words sounded almost unfamiliar coming from an immortal ruler known for discipline rather than sentiment. Helena quietly studied him before asking the next question. Who was this person? Damien answered without hesitation. A waitress. The room became completely still. Not because she was human. The Ashcroft Kingdom had protected humans for centuries under strict agreements. What unsettled them was something entirely different. Vampire kings did not involve themselves personally in ordinary lives. Systems existed for charity. Foundations existed for assistance. Kings established those systems. They did not quietly deliver blankets to strangers before dawn. Elder Marcus. Open the folder. Our investigators completed a discreet background review after receiving the initial report. Damien finally accepted the documents. Emily Carter, 24 years old. Part-time college student studying accounting. 3 jobs. No criminal record. No outstanding lawsuits. Average grades. Consistent employment history. Every evaluation described her with nearly identical words. Reliable. Honest. Quiet. Helpful. One report caught Damien's attention. 2 months earlier, an elderly dishwasher had collapsed during a dinner rush at another restaurant. Emily had remained beside the frightened woman until paramedics arrived, then completed both shifts herself so the woman would not lose her wages. There had been no publicity, no reward, no social media posts celebrating the moment. She had simply gone back to work the next morning. Damien slowly closed the folder. Elder Helena noticed the subtle change in his expression. There is more, is there not? Nathan stepped forward after receiving a small nod from the king. Our investigators also discovered that Miss Carter has visited St. Gabriel Medical Center every Thursday evening for the past 11 months. Elder Lucien looked up. For treatment. Nathan gently shook his head. To read books aloud to patients who no longer receive visitors. No one spoke. Even the oldest immortals understood how unusual that quiet devotion had become in the modern world. Damien rested one hand lightly against the back of his chair. She has no idea anyone noticed. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried quiet certainty. She chooses compassion when there is no audience, no reward, and no expectation of recognition. Elder Helena lowered her eyes thoughtfully. Perhaps that is exactly why fate allowed you to notice her at all. Emily never imagined that someone had quietly investigated her life. By Tuesday afternoon, her world remained exactly as ordinary as it had always been. She tied her apron behind the restaurant counter, balanced 3 steaming plates on one arm, and greeted every customer with the same gentle smile she had practiced since her first shift nearly 6 years earlier. The lunch crowd filled every booth. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. Orders echoed from the kitchen. The familiar rhythm left little room for exhaustion. Even after sleeping inside her car for another night, she thanked every guest who looked her in the eye and every coworker who offered a kind word. The mysterious blanket had been folded carefully inside her trunk. She could not bring herself to sell it, even though she suspected it was worth more than everything else she owned. During her short break, she stepped outside through the back entrance and called St. Gabriel Medical Center. A cheerful volunteer answered immediately. Emily smiled as she listened. "Of course I am still coming tonight," she said softly. "Mrs. Donnelly never misses our Tuesday chapter." After hanging up, she opened the lunchbox she had packed before sunrise. A peanut butter sandwich, a small apple, and a bottle of water. Before taking her first bite, she noticed the dishwasher searching nervously through her pockets. The older woman sighed with disappointment. "I forgot my wallet again." Emily quietly pushed the sandwich toward her. "Please take mine. I can grab something later." "You need lunch too," the woman protested. Emily laughed gently. "I promise I will survive one afternoon." She meant every word. Hunger had become familiar enough that kindness still came first. Several blocks away, inside the executive headquarters of Ashcroft Holdings, Damien watched the security footage Nathan had legally obtained from the restaurant with the owner's permission during a routine employment verification request. There was no hidden agenda in the recording, only ordinary moments unfolding beneath fluorescent lights. Emily thanked impatient customers instead of matching their frustration. She helped a young father carry 2 high chairs to his table before returning to refill coffee without being asked. When a little boy accidentally dropped his chocolate milk, she knelt beside him with paper towels before anyone could become embarrassed. The child looked close to tears until Emily smiled, and whispered something that made him giggle instead. Damien replayed the scene twice. Not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because genuine kindness rarely announced itself with dramatic gestures. It lived inside moments most people ignored. Nathan entered the office carrying another report. Your Majesty, there is one detail we almost overlooked. Damien accepted the document. It showed several declined apartment applications submitted by Emily during the previous month. Stable employment. Positive references. Rejected every time because her income fell a few $100s below the required threshold. She had never missed a payment before losing her second job 6 months earlier when the restaurant permanently closed. Since then, she had simply worked longer hours without complaining. Damien closed the folder slowly. She did everything correctly. Nathan nodded. Yes, sir. And still the door remained closed. Nathan offered no reply because none was needed. Damien walked toward the window overlooking Manhattan. Thousands of people hurried through the streets below, each carrying unseen burdens behind ordinary expressions. Wealth could purchase towers, companies, and influence, yet it could never guarantee compassion. That truth had remained unchanged through every century he had lived. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass, pale and motionless against the golden afternoon skyline. At last he spoke. Prepare an entry-level accounting position within Ashcroft Holdings. Nathan looked surprised. Without revealing your involvement? Damien answered without hesitation. She has earned an opportunity, not charity. Make certain the position is real, the interview is fair, and the decision belongs entirely to her. Nathan smiled almost imperceptibly. It was the first order in decades that sounded less like the command of an immortal king and more like the quiet promise of a man who still believed one small act of kindness could change an entire future. 3 days later, an email arrived in Emily Carter's inbox while she was wiping coffee rings from a corner table during the slow afternoon lull. She almost ignored the notification, assuming it was another rejection from an apartment complex or another reminder about an overdue utility bill. Instead, the subject line stopped her hands completely. Ashcroft Holdings. Invitation to interview. Emily stared at the screen, reading the message once, then twice, then a third time. The company thanked her for expressing interest in an entry-level accounting position and invited her to interview the following morning at 9 o'clock. She frowned in confusion. She had never submitted an application to Ashcroft Holdings. At least she could not remember doing so. Then she suddenly reached into her backpack and found the silver card still tucked inside a notebook. The engraved crest matched the logo displayed in the email signature perfectly. Her heartbeat quickened. Was this connected to the mysterious blanket and the gasoline that had somehow appeared in her car? Emily closed her eyes for a moment before quietly whispering, "Whoever you are, thank you." She immediately borrowed the restaurant computer during her break to confirm the email was legitimate. Everything checked out. The interview was real. Yet excitement quickly gave way to worry. She owned only one interview outfit, a navy blue blouse she had purchased from a thrift store nearly 3 years earlier. The sleeves were slightly faded, and one button had been replaced with a similar but not identical color. After finishing her evening shift at St. Gabriel Medical Center, where Mrs. Donnelly smiled through another chapter of their favorite novel, Emily drove to a 24-hour laundromat. She carefully washed the blouse, pressed every wrinkle as neatly as possible, and hung it inside her car to dry overnight. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning before she finally rested against the driver's seat once again. Meanwhile, high above the city, Damien stood inside the executive conference room where tomorrow's interviews would take place. Nathan reviewed the final schedule on a digital tablet. 7 candidates remain after preliminary screening, he said. Miss Carter is scheduled 4th. Damien slowly walked around the polished walnut table. She receives no special treatment. Nathan nodded. The hiring committee knows only that you requested a standard recruitment process. Damien adjusted. One chair that sat slightly out of alignment. It was a small movement, almost unnoticed. Every question should measure ability, character, and potential. Nothing else. Nathan hesitated before speaking again. Will you observe? Damien looked toward the glass wall overlooking the city lights. From another room. She must never believe this opportunity was arranged for her. Nathan understood immediately. Respect meant allowing someone to stand on their own feet, even when unseen hands had quietly opened the first door. Early the next morning, Emily parked several blocks away to avoid expensive downtown parking fees. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror one last time, smoothing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. The faded blouse looked cleaner than she expected. Her shoes had been polished with an old cloth before sunrise. They were still worn, but at least they looked cared for. She took one deep breath, picked up her backpack, and walked toward the tallest office tower she had ever entered. Employees streamed confidently through revolving glass doors while polished marble floors reflected sunlight across the vast lobby. Emily instinctively slowed her pace, suddenly feeling as though she had wandered into a different world. Then the receptionist smiled warmly. "Good morning. You must be Miss Carter. We have been expecting you." Emily smiled back with quiet gratitude, never realizing that behind a discreet observation window on the 45th floor, pale gray eyes watched her step into the building with the same humble courage she had shown every single day of her ordinary life. Emily sat quietly outside Conference Room 12, her hands folded neatly over the worn leather folder that held her resume, college transcripts, and two carefully written recommendation letters. Around her, the other candidates tapped confidently on tablets, reviewed financial reports, or spoke about previous internships at prestigious firms. Their tailored suits fit perfectly. Their polished shoes reflected the morning sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Emily looked down at the single loose thread near the cuff of her thrift store blouse and gently tucked it inside the sleeve. She reminded herself that appearances could open doors, but character had carried her this far. Across the hall, an assistant stepped out with a welcoming smile. "Miss Carter, we are ready for you." Emily stood, thanked her softly, and followed her into the spacious conference room. 3 interviewers greeted her warmly. Their questions began exactly as expected. Education, accounting principles, time management, teamwork. Emily answered honestly, never exaggerating an achievement or pretending to know something she did not. When she reached the limits of her experience, she simply admitted it and explained how she planned to learn. Behind a hidden observation window 1 floor above, Damien watched every moment without speaking. Nathan stood beside him, occasionally glancing toward the king instead of the screen. "She is more nervous than the others," Nathan observed quietly. Damien's eyes never left the monitor. "Yes, yet she has not tried to impress them." Damien gave the faintest nod. "Because she is trying to tell the truth." Inside the conference room, the interview reached its final question. The senior manager leaned forward with a thoughtful expression. "Miss Carter, imagine you discover that a co-worker accidentally made an accounting error that no one else has noticed. Correcting it would delay an important financial report and could embarrass your teammate. What would you do?" Emily paused for several seconds. She did not rush toward the first answer that sounded impressive. Instead, she looked down briefly before meeting the interviewer's eyes again. "I would correct the mistake with them, not for them," she replied. "The report should be accurate because people depend on honest numbers. But I would also protect my coworkers' dignity if the mistake was truly an accident. Everyone deserves the chance to learn without unnecessary humiliation." Silence followed her answer. One interviewer slowly lowered his pen. Another smiled almost imperceptibly. Damien remained motionless, yet Nathan noticed something rare. The king's expression had softened, almost too subtly for anyone else to recognize. The interview concluded a few minutes later. Emily stood, thanked each interviewer individually, shook every hand, and quietly walked toward the elevator. As she crossed the lobby, she noticed a little girl sitting alone on one of the leather benches near the reception desk. The child looked no older than 6, hugging a stuffed rabbit while tears filled her bright blue eyes. Business professionals hurried past without slowing down. Emily hesitated only a heartbeat before kneeling beside her. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. The little girl sniffled. "My daddy is in a meeting. I cannot find Miss Kelly." Emily smiled kindly. "Then how about we wait together until someone comes?" She reached into her backpack and found the small package of animal crackers she had planned to eat for lunch. Without hesitation, she offered it to the little girl. "Would you like to share these with me?" The child's worried face slowly brightened into a smile. Several security cameras quietly captured the entire exchange. Upstairs, Nathan folded his arms. She gave away her lunch again. Damien watched as Emily laughed softly after the little girl proudly showed her a crayon drawing folded inside the stuffed rabbit's pocket. The king remembered another report from Nathan's investigation. She always shared before she kept. It was never planned, never performed, simply who she was. Moments later, a frantic executive assistant hurried across the lobby before embracing the relieved child. Emily quietly stood, wished the girl a wonderful day, and walked toward the revolving doors without waiting for thanks. She believed the interview was over. She believed she would simply return to the restaurant for her evening shift. She never noticed the silent figure standing behind the tinted glass high above the city, watching her leave with the same quiet admiration that had only grown stronger since the cold November night, when 7 ordinary words had unexpectedly reached the ears of an immortal king. The hiring committee met less than 15 minutes after the final interview concluded. 7 resumes rested neatly on the conference table beside handwritten notes and evaluation forms. Through the panoramic windows, Manhattan stretched beneath a clear autumn sky, busy and indifferent to the quiet decision about to shape one ordinary life. The department director reviewed the scores with measured confidence. 2 candidates possessed stronger academic records. One had graduated from a prestigious university. Another already held experience at a respected financial firm. On paper, Emily Carter ranked 3rd. Nathan entered the room, carrying 1 additional folder. Every conversation stopped. Although few employees knew his connection to the company's true leadership, everyone understood that Nathan Reynolds represented the highest level of executive authority. He placed the folder on the table without sitting down. "Before you finalize your recommendation," he said calmly, "there is supplemental information authorized for review." The department director opened the file. Inside were verified references collected during the recruitment process. Former supervisors described Emily with remarkable consistency. She arrived early. She stayed late without complaint. She accepted responsibility before seeking recognition. One restaurant owner had written a single sentence that caught everyone's attention. "If honesty could be hired by the hour, Emily Carter would be priceless." Another reference came from St. Gabriel Medical Center. Emily had volunteered every week for nearly a year, never requesting community service credit or public acknowledgement. When asked why she continued returning after exhausting workdays, she had simply answered that nobody should feel forgotten. The room grew unusually quiet. One interviewer slowly set his reading glasses on the table. "These qualities cannot be taught," he murmured. Nathan offered only a respectful nod. "The committee's decision remains entirely your own." Nearly 40 floors above, Damien stood alone in his private office. He did not ask for updates. He trusted the process because it had been built upon fairness rather than influence. Even so, his extraordinary hearing carried faint echoes upward through layers of steel and glass, allowing him to distinguish voices no human could possibly recognize. Technical skills improve with training. Integrity rarely changes. She answered every difficult question without pretending. "I believe she belongs here." Damien quietly closed his eyes. The choice was no longer his. It belonged to people who had seen exactly what he had first noticed beneath the glittering lights of a crowded ballroom. Almost an hour later, Emily finished refilling coffee cups during the afternoon rush when her cell phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. She almost ignored it because the restaurant was busy, but the caller identification displayed Ashcroft Holdings. Her hands suddenly became still. "Emily speaking," she answered softly after stepping into the service hallway. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter," a pleasant voice replied. "I am delighted to inform you that the hiring committee has unanimously offered you the accounting associate position. If you are still interested, we would be honored to welcome you next Monday." Emily leaned gently against the wall, unable to speak for several seconds. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief. "Yes," she whispered at last. "Yes, I would be honored." After the call ended, she remained standing in the quiet hallway, pressing one trembling hand over her heart. For the first time in months, she could imagine paying rent without fear. She could schedule the repairs her aging car desperately needed. She could buy her mother's medication without calculating which bill would have to wait. Most of all, she could finally stop wondering where she would sleep each night. She quietly looked upward, as though hoping the unknown stranger who had left the blanket and mysterious silver card might somehow hear her gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered into the silence. Far away, Damien stood beside the broad windows of his office as the afternoon sun bathed the city in warm golden light. He would never hear those words through ordinary distance. Yet somehow, beyond reason and beyond centuries of carefully guarded restraint, he felt that the quiet hope returning to one human heart had become the most meaningful victory he had witnessed in a very long time. Monday arrived with clear skies and a crisp breeze that carried the first signs of winter through the streets of Manhattan. Emily Carter parked her old Honda in the same inexpensive garage several blocks away from Ashcroft Holdings, but this time she did not dread the walk. She carried a small paper bag holding her lunch, wore the same carefully pressed navy blouse beneath a new company identification badge, and smiled at every stranger who happened to meet her eyes. The revolving doors no longer felt intimidating. They felt like the entrance to a future she had almost stopped believing was possible. As she stepped into the lobby, the receptionist greeted her by name. Several employees welcomed her warmly before guiding her toward orientation. Everything felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. Upstairs, Damien Ashcroft watched quietly from his office as the elevators carried new employees toward their first day. He could have remained hidden forever. No rule required a king to know every new hire. Yet before the orientation officially began, he made one unexpected decision. Nathan looked up from his tablet as Damien reached for his suit jacket. "You are attending the welcome reception personally?" Nathan asked. Damien adjusted the cuffs of his black jacket with calm precision. "For 10 minutes. Nathan smiled knowingly, but said nothing more. Inside the orientation room, nearly 30 new employees settled into their seats while conversations filled the air. Emily chose a chair near the back, hoping not to attract attention. She listened carefully as department leaders introduced themselves and explained the company's values. One sentence displayed across the large presentation screen caught her attention immediately. "Character builds trust. Trust builds everything else." Emily quietly smiled. Those words somehow felt familiar. Suddenly, the room became silent. Every executive near the front entrance stood at once. Emily turned with everyone else as a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit entered without haste. His presence seemed to calm the entire room before he spoke a single word. Damien welcomed the new employees with a composed smile. "Each of you was hired because someone believed you. Would strengthen this company not only through talent, but through integrity. Skills create success. Character decides what success becomes." Emily froze. She recognized his voice instantly. She had heard it only once before, faintly, in the hotel ballroom during the charity gala. Then her memory connected another detail. The elegant crest engraved behind him on the presentation screen matched the mysterious silver card resting safely inside her wallet. Her heart skipped a beat. Damien's eyes briefly swept across the room. They met hers for only a fraction of a second before moving naturally onward. No one else noticed. To every observer, he had simply acknowledged another employee. But in that silent glance, Emily felt something impossible to explain. It was not recognition alone. It was quiet reassurance, as though someone had already seen her at her lowest without ever making her feel ashamed of it. The orientation concluded a few minutes later. As employees filed toward different departments, Emily noticed a familiar charcoal gray blanket neatly folded inside a decorative display cabinet near the executive elevator. A small plaque beneath it read, "Kindness given freely is never forgotten." She stopped walking. The fabric, the color, even the subtle stitched pattern along the edges were unmistakable. Before she could study it longer, Nathan approached with his usual warm professionalism. "Miss Carter," he said kindly, "welcome to Ashcroft Holdings. We are very happy you are here." Emily glanced once more toward the display before looking back at him. "May I ask who donated that blanket?" Nathan followed her gaze, then smiled gently. "The story behind it belongs to someone who preferred helping quietly." Emily lowered her eyes, understanding more than the answer actually revealed. She smiled with heartfelt gratitude and continued toward her new department, never realizing that high above the city, an immortal king watched her begin the next chapter of her life with the same humble grace that had first captured his attention on a cold November night. And although Emily still did not know the full truth about the mysterious stranger who had changed her path, one truth had already become undeniable. Sometimes the greatest miracles arrived without applause, without recognition, and without asking for anything in return, because even the oldest hearts could still remember that true power was never measured by what someone possessed, but by the quiet kindness they chose to give when no one was watching.